Hello? Can you hear? I have no sound. I'm not able to hear you. I can't hear.
Commitments remain in preparing final reports. Any remaining funds must be transferred to another qualified 501c3 organization with a similar charitable purpose.
So I think that's like if you're done and you like.
Oh yeah, I get it because you're done, but
Yeah.
it has to be transferred to a similar charitable purpose.
Mhm.
You know, my understanding is that these are CPF funds, right? And so I want to make sure what their charitable purpose is, and I look at their mission statement,
Right.
and their mission statement says, we're here to be kind of a conduit. It doesn't say that we want to do educational things, or we
Right.
want to do capital projects, or,
Right, no, that makes sense.
so that's, I just want a little clarification there.
Yeah.
Sure. Am I on now?
Oh, yeah,
We
can
can
you
hear
hear
you.
it? Can
Yeah.
you
Oh,
hear
good.
us?
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Oh, nice, thank you.
And I heard the question. Essentially, we the whatever program we've adopted, if they unwind with funds left over, we just ask them where they want them to go, and as long as it's a charitable purpose, our main concern is that the funds don't get distributed to an organization that puts our tax exempt status at risk. But generally, we let the group that has the program decide where to send the money. So it's really up to the the committee or the group that has the program rather than us. We'd rather actually not make that decision unless the group doesn't have a preference.
Yeah, so just to reiterate again, I guess what I'm hearing you say, Mr. Brooks, is that the program group would be the one that would decide whether or not it's the right charitable organization to close out the funds to.
Yeah, and we would ask them which organization they would like it to go to. So we rarely pick an organization. It's only been in situations where there's been some kind of disaster and everybody disappears and there's money left over and we don't know how to get a hold of anybody, and then we might give it to a social service organization. But in general, the group that's identified as the volunteer group will decide and tell us where to send the money.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
So I guess I get to keep going for a while.
Sure.
Do you charge a fee?
We retain 5% of funds donated. So yes, we charge a fee, but it's not an annual fee. So if you get a donation of $1,000, we keep $50, and $950 is available for program expenses.
Okay. When you approve a program and that program fundraises and they have the funds in one of your designated accounts for that,
Yes.
And they come to you and they say, okay, we want to do whatever it is, X. Who decides whether the release of the funds is appropriate? You or the program administrator?
Ordinarily, the way we generally operate is there's a couple of options. We can pay invoices directly, if they're, if they're program related, or we can distribute funds for a specific purpose and then they send us receipts. Um, the the due diligence we do is specifically that as long as it's a program related expense, we'll distribute funds, but we don't distribute funds to personal accounts. We'll pay invoices directly. Or if there are some situations where like they'll have multiple events or a finance need, like you're going to have an event and you might have out-of-pocket costs, and so we'll distribute $1,000 into a separate checking account and then ask for receipts to verify what the money was spent on. But we generally follow the direction of the program administrator. It's not very common that people ask for money that's not appropriate.
Okay, but however, the final say of whether to authorize release of the funds rests with CPF.
Correct.
They want to make sure that it's appropriate.
Certainly. So the way to think of it is we are the board of directors, and the program is a group of volunteers. So we have the legal responsibility to make sure that funds distributed are spent on legitimate program expenses. So yeah, it's our responsibility to be able to justify that, for example, to the IRS. The way that it works is that all of our program expenses and revenues are reported on our tax return. So in this case, if they set up a program for the, Friends of Coos Bay Parks, that entity doesn't do its own tax reporting. That all of the revenue, all of the donations and expenses are tracked on our tax return. So we have to be able to verify that all those expenses are legitimate program expenses. So we do that oversight.
Okay. I looked at some of the projects that you've been involved with before in the past. From a Parks Commission standpoint, I kind of want to give you a hypothetical, and I know that's not fair to you.
Oh, no, it's fine. We do hypotheticals all the time.
But let's say we had a bunch of, do you accept programs that involve capital projects? For example, if we had a community building in our park that needed a new roof, and we had some volunteers that wanted to start fundraising for a new roof on that community building, would that be the kind of project that you would be able to approve?
Certainly. We can do anything that would be treated as a charitable activity, we can essentially incubate or house under our nonprofit. When a couple of limitations, we wouldn't be able to do like a real estate transaction because we don't want to take title to property. Because eventually the program is going to either end or become its own nonprofit, and we don't want to be in a position where the charitable partnership fund has title to a specific asset. It creates liability for us, and then it creates a lot of complexity to try and unwind that. But other than that, if it's any kind of fundraising activity, we can certainly have a program to raise money for that specific purpose. This program itself, for example, if the community building that you're talking about is part of the parks system, this program could have that be one of its activities to raise funds for that roof. We can hire contractors to execute, I'll give you an example. So if you, for the park system, if you wanted to hire someone to build trails, and you wanted to raise grant money for that, we could if there's any situation where a contractor is hired, the charitable partnership fund actually executes that contract. Again, because we would be the nonprofit of record, so we would be the technical employer, so they would be our responsibility. We would give them a 1099 at the end of the year from the charitable partnership fund. So the committee isn't responsible, for example, for hiring subcontractors on specific projects. That would be our responsibility.
Okay, and this part isn't a question to you, but it's one of the things that I kind of thought about as I was thinking about this. I mean, because there's some upsides to not having to go through the process of forming a 503c1, and I get that. But I worry a little bit, this is more for the commissioners and Greg and Jennifer, about the coordination on those kinds of things. Because if you're hiring a contractor to work on public property that's the city, somehow the city has to get involved and decide that that's appropriate. And so I worry a little bit about the coordination between those kinds of things, about where does the city get involved, where does the Parks Commission get involved. And it's not just in the appropriation of the funds, paying somebody, but it's also in the projects. You know,
Sure.
We have 3 people out there that want to do a project in a park. There isn't any sense in them applying to you unless the Parks Commission, the city, has decided that that's probably a good project. So I just want to make sure that, you know, the mechanics of some of this can be maybe a little bit different than doing some other kind of projects that may have been involved with non-public property and
Sure.
stuff. So
Well,
go ahead.
No, and I was going to say, and I totally understand that. Part of what we try and do is, when groups are doing this, is either address those issues up front or help the group avoid them by, not putting themselves in situations where, for example, they're paying for work being done on public property, which would really require the city to be the contracting party, not the nonprofit. And so in those kinds of situations, you probably want to limit our involvement to simply raising funds that would then get donated to that particular project that the city's doing in whatever mechanism the city uses for that kind of arrangement. I'll give you an example of something I'm doing in Portland. The Portland Bureau of Transportation has a program where they allow communities to create a plaza on a city street. And there's a mechanism to do that, but the local communities tend to not be very well organized. And so what happens is that you get a group of business people or a group of community people together, and they have good ideas, and then they're not sure how to execute. And so we're working with 3 different local communities where each one will have a program. And what they've done is identified a series of activities that they want to do. And they will raise money through us for each of those activities that are pre-approved by the Bureau of Transportation. So in that case, we're working through an established city mechanism, but the only, the purpose that we serve is allowing the community groups to have some way of organizing themselves so that they can bring in revenue for what they want to accomplish and then kind of work underneath an umbrella of established organization. And so in 2 of these cases, they have very specific, discrete things they want to do. And once they've done those things, the program will just end and they don't have to kind of maintain a community organization over time. So a little background. So I've worked for Portland Development Commission. I've done work for the city of Atlanta and the city of Beaverton. So I have a fair amount of experience with municipal issues and kind of how nonprofits and municipalities have to coordinate work. So if issues like that come up with this group, assuming they move forward, that part of my role would be making sure that the group and the city were kind of working together in a way that made sense for everybody.
Okay, as I pondered this a little bit, I can think of projects, for example, your trail, the example of a trail building would be a good project, but again, on public property, and the city would probably. I'm assuming that there were instances where you would make a payment directly to the city for them to go ahead and accomplish that project. I mean, I'm assuming that that's maybe a possibility, because sometimes the city has to go ahead and put out a request for proposals.
Yeah.
You would meet certain guidelines in order to contract. It's not like it would the program administrator or you guys would be in a position to let those kind of proposals out to make sure that they met the city's requirements. So you could see instances where the funds that were raised by volunteers that you were holding in a designated fund, when it came time to do that project, you could actually make the payment to the city?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I only brought that up again because, the disposition of funds, when I read some of this stuff again, is to charitable organizations. And I don't know if the city would be considered a charitable organization for that disposition of funds.
But it's for a charitable or public purpose. And so it's really the purpose rather than the organization specifically. Part of the reason we set this up in the first place is to help people not do things that aren't going to actually work well. It's people like to create nonprofits first, and then sometimes you create a nonprofit and you think you're going to do something and it turns out that it doesn't work very well. And then you've got an organization that you have to keep alive, and things get really complicated. So we're more than happy if the things that they decide they want to try and do are actually pretty complicated, because you have to do city contracting and it's not the best approach. It's part of our job, again, to say maybe we should try a different way of trying to get this done, because this isn't going to work so well. So, our primary goal is to help people accomplish things without a lot of complicated stuff that distracts from what they're trying to do. And so, we look at our role as kind of facilitators, which means working with the city so that the city's comfortable with how all this thing unfolds as well.
I've noticed, we've been fortunate enough through the good efforts of city staff to get some grants awarded to us occasionally. And I'm a little curious about how that process would work under this. I know you would not be writing the grants, I'm assuming, but yet when you write a grant, the money has to come to somebody. And again, this may be more for the commissioners and for Greg and Jennifer and city staff, is that, so we've been, like I said, we've been fortunate that we've put in some requests for grants to do certain things, the Mingus Park bathrooms, the community building, but those are grants written to the city.
Correct.
So I don't, I wonder about how this whole grant process would work. And would the city no longer then be able to write grants for us?
No. So there would be two separate, the city's grant system would not be affected by this. Essentially, we don't physically write the grant, but the grant goes out under our name and tax ID number. So it would be a grant request from the Charitable Partnership Fund for a specific project or program. Again, foundations and governments make grants generally for a specific program expense. So it would have to be something that that this group would be doing, kind of, that the city wouldn't necessarily be able to do on its own. We're not looking, I don't think they're looking at it in terms of getting grants that would otherwise go to the city. And I'm kind of thinking that this is going to be more of a, individual donation process and maybe some programming in city parks, or just having another partner that has a separate tax ID number that can get access to funds that maybe the city wouldn't normally go for. But it would be supplemental to the grants that the city would be getting on its own. And again, it would be a charitable partnership fund grant for the Coos Bay Friends of Parks, or whatever they call them, and the funds would go into that program's designated account to pay for project expenses through the grant.
So the mechanics of what I think I understand, and I can see where the city grants would be different, but the mechanics of other grants, then this volunteer group with the program administrator would actually come up with, because you're not involved in fundraising per se.
Correct.
And so they would come up with something that they want to apply a grant for, would fill out the grant forms, but the organization actually applying for the grant would be CPF, and
Correct.
CPS would be signing that application for the grant.
Exactly. That's, by being involved at that level, it also puts us in a position where we end up reviewing the grants, both for, is it well written, but also is this are you applying for a grant that actually meets the program objectives that you're trying to go for? So it allows us to kind of be a resource to make sure that the grant request itself is appropriate for what they're trying to accomplish. But then it does go out under our name and our tax ID number. Ordinarily, granting entities want to see the organization's financials, so we have to supply that. But again, all the money goes, 95% of the money goes to the project itself. And then, we retain the 5% for our administration.
Have you been involved in any programs that have focused on supporting parks, a city park or a state park at all?
I helped form the precursor to the Portland Parks Foundation, although that was more like the way we were involved is that a group wanted to create a Parks Foundation, and by us adopting the program itself was to go through the process of creating a Parks Foundation. And so because that effort was done through a nonprofit, they could raise donated money to pay the cost of setting up the foundation. So in that case, we didn't do any programming per se, but we did, kind of act as the precursor for that. We also helped support a group called Friends of the Green Loop, as the city of Portland was trying to create an interconnected loop of parks around the city. And Friends of the Green Loop was a private group that was supporting that effort by doing kind of community engagement and community outreach and raising money for, particular community things, helping advocate for designating certain portions of the Green Loop in particular ways and things like that. They worked pretty closely with the city. I think that eventually became its own nonprofit, but I can't remember. That's been like 10 years.
I'm going to let someone else ask a question.
Sure.
So we talked about several different projects that have transitioned. Do you have a transition fee for when you roll somebody out into their own entity, or it's just
No.
the 5?
No. Usually what happens is they get tired of having to ask for money, and then they set up their own organization, and then we just transfer whatever they've had in their accounts over to them, and that's the end of it. I've actually written... I like to help groups make the transition and keep their legal fees down. So I'll help, particularly writing. There's an application you have to send to the IRS called a Form 1023, and I've written about 36 of those for organizations. And if there's any lawyers on the commission, you have to plug your ears, but they didn't charge anybody. Profit to, and so yeah, we just kind of help that transition happen.
I like the idea about what you did for the Portland Parks, and that when they wanted a foundation, you helped them get the 501(c) status. I think that's a good thing. Maybe that will help us in some future time as well. One last kind of specific question. I went online and I looked at your most recently filed 990, November of 2024, and I was impressed with a lot of the expenses that are recorded on there as actually being fairly low. And that's the reason I was looking at it. I was trying to look and see what kind of overheads involved in running your organization, and they were low. It was like $3,000 for a management fee, $240 for accounting, $220 for office expenses, and $2,300 and some for information technology, all which are real reasonable. I did notice, however, though, that you contracted with a private contractor to do some work, and that was a larger fee. That was $115,000. And I was curious, was that tied to a specific project? Or is that something that you have on board to do work for you on an ongoing basis?
No, that was probably a program cost. That I know that internally that we've never hired a consultant like that, and we don't have a consultant like on staff that we hire out to programs. So generally what happens is that we'll have a program that has a project budget. Some of them can be pretty significant, and half of it can be to pay consultants or contractors to do work. So without having seen it, my guess is that was a direct program expense.
Okay.
It shows up as a cost for us because technically it's our program. But yeah, that's generally where that comes up.
Okay, I kind of thought that's what it was, because it was a contract with Stephanie Weber, and I noticed she was really involved in the unhoused and issues as well. And I figured maybe that was someone that you contracted with for a particular program. So that helps me understand. I didn't have anything more else, Chair.
Okay.
And I was wondering, can there be multiple groups? So just here today we have someone who does cleanups, and maybe they would perhaps be interested. And we also have someone here that does kind of cultural conservation. And I'm sure there are other people in this room that would be interested in mountain biking and hiking trails.
Sure.
And so those were very different goals. All of which kind of fall under the things that we all, as a group in the Parks Commission, are promoting. But can the same group have different kind of running projects at the same time, or
Sure.
We have to form multiple groups?
No. The best way, so in that kind of situation, the best way to deal with it would be if you gave us a program description where it said, we're forming a group to support activities and resources for the Coos Bay Parks, and which may include, and then you list a bunch of things that you might do. And that way you don't have to keep coming back to us and say, oh, we're going to do a new thing. In some cases, if you have a very specific, large goal that you want a particular group to focus on without getting distracted by, meetings about other things, then you can create a one-off program for a specific task or goal. So you start with what are our real objectives. And if the objective is to set up an organization that can address, that can be kind of like the clearinghouse for programs that support parks without any particular one being the primary focus, then you can set it up that way in the beginning. Or if there's a large thing you want to do, then you can go one off. We originally talked for the thing that I was mentioning before in Portland, with the street programs. I originally talked to the Portland to PBOT, Portland Bureau of Transportation, about creating kind of like an umbrella entity that any community could kind of just come and take advantage of, but that got really unwieldy really fast, because then, do all these different groups have to work together? How do they coordinate? Who gets priority? All this kind of thing. So in that case, we decided to just do individual programs for each street. And it's, it just makes it cleaner and simpler that way. And for us, it's just, fundamentally, it's just setting up multiple bank accounts as opposed to one. So it kind of depends on how people feel like organizing themselves. So it depends.
And then, we're a very small little community, and everybody's very passionate, but I know we do struggle with funding.
Sure.
I think that's often a limiting factor for a lot of the projects that we all would like to see get off the ground. And so your organization, I'm kind of confused. Do you help with funding, or do you provide the funding entirely?
No. So we're let's say we're very flexible, but we're very thin. And by that I mean we can basically accommodate almost any kind of program objective that people want to do in terms of having a platform to do it under. We don't have a lot of resources like a consultant who can help with fundraising, things like that. The way we work kind of day to day is that if a group comes to me, they're basically my program. And if they need help understanding how to raise money, what's the best way to write grants, who might you approach for grants, things like that, as kind of an advisor. They work through me, and I help try and give as much advice as I can. But ultimately, they do the grant writing and fundraising, actual on the ground work. That's one of the reasons why we're very inexpensive. We have a part-time bookkeeper and 3 volunteer board members, and that's the extent of our kind of overhead. So in order to be that flexible, we can't really spend a lot of time providing like technical advice and services. But my personal role with any project that comes through me is to be the guide. So I'll sit down with groups and we'll talk about how to fundraise and how to write grants and that kind of thing. So
Patrick, Mr. Brooks can correct me, but when I read through all this, I see them as being an umbrella 501c3 program. Whose responsibility is more administrative and setting up designated accounts, reviewing the projects from that standpoint, buying the necessary papers with, I'm assuming, the state and the federal government to justify the 501c3. So but when I read through it, and I wouldn't expect them to do it, their function is not funding or grant writing or anything. That's really upon the program administrator and the volunteer group to raise those funds, and then on CPF to go ahead and set up the accounts and run those and take care of the paperwork. So, and I'm assuming, Mr. Brooks, those accounts are all set up and something that generates interest, because I noticed there was some interest on those tax return forms.
yeah, some of the accounts, the larger accounts, where it's a multiple year kind of thing and there's a large balance, we'll put some of the funds in interest bearing accounts. a lot of the programs we have are relatively small, and if they raise money and then spend it in the course of 7 or 8 or 9 months, it'll just go into a regular checking account. In part because the interest, technically would be interest that goes to the charitable partnership fund, and we're not interested in kind of messing around with where the interest should go and trying to arbitrage this account. I mean, I think you probably saw we run about $1 million a year through our accounts, and basically with a part-time bookkeeper, we don't have the time to try and figure out, gee, if we leave money in here for 6 months, we earn this much interest, and we can use that for our expenses. We just like to keep it simple. So, and I did want to make a point though. So we, particularly my co-founder and I, did this because a lot of things about the way the nonprofit world works we found irritating. And one of the irritations is that people don't have anybody that they can just call and say, how does this work? So we decided not to raise money for ourselves, because if we did, then we would have to create an infrastructure and then we'd have to run it. So instead, we get to spend our time on this, picking up the phone and talking to people and explaining how things work so that they have a better chance of succeeding at their program. And then, just people do really cool stuff and it's fun to hear about. So that's why we do this. And, I have limited time because, I have to make money, but when, as much time as I have to give to groups to help them succeed is the time that I can give them. And so it's kind of, I joke with people that this is so that I don't ever have to be on a board. And I feel a lot more productive in this kind of situation than I might otherwise. So basically, this is kind of fun for me. And in the case of this group, if they run into a roadblock or have questions about how to work with the city and all that, that's, my job is to kind of come in and help guide them to the right outcome.
Thank you. We'll wrap it up with a few more commissioner questions. Patrick, did you have any additional questions? Harv? You good? All right. Staff questions? Yeah, go ahead.
And is there a deadline? So if a group appears a year or two from now, is the door still open?
Oh yeah, we're 24/7, 365. I mean, we've had people who talk to us once and they show up 4 years later. And there's no kind of, we'll work with you for 18 months or 2 years and then you have to go on your own either. We don't have unlimited capacity, so when people when it feels like they're ready to kind of make the transition to their own organization, we'll help encourage that. But there's no kind of timeline on either end.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions, comments? Yeah, Cricket.
So this is Cricket Souls from Coos Bay, and I'm the volunteer manager of the cemetery. And I see you provide a great service, and I think it would be particularly useful, say, if there was going to be a major overhaul of the the swimming pool at Mingus Park, where there's a big project. One question that wasn't asked, which is one of the dilemmas in accepting donations, is if you take things like Venmo and that kind of thing, credit cards. Is that something you're set up to do?
Sure. What we tend to do is have the group itself set up like a PayPal or Venmo account. And the reason we do that is because we try and stay in the background, and we want the groups to know who their donors are. So if they set up the Venmo account and attach it to our checking account, then they see who's giving money and they can thank them directly. What tends to happen in other kinds of situations is that money comes in and the group who gets the money doesn't have any idea where it came from or how much it was or any of that. So we like to have the group set it up themselves. But yes, we have several organizations. Well, I think almost everybody now has that capacity.
So that would be a limiting factor for the cemetery, and often our things are worked through the school as well because they're are not allowed to set up Venmo accounts. So we wouldn't be able to do that. It seems to me you provide a great service, and particularly as that, if you were looking at setting up your own 501c3 thing, it's kind of like you're providing the most difficult board position, which is the treasurer. But that as far as an incubator, we could move forward if we get to that stage, but we're still a little bit, that might be a stopgap measure, or like I said, for a big capital project, it might be a great option, but I don't see it serving all our diverse parks and needs, particularly in some of the things that we can't take credit cards and things, and none of our organizations can set that up on their own. So I still see moving forward with a 501c3 would be a better option, and looking at other resources like the not-for-profit organization of Association of Oregon, which does provide lots of help and often free services. And it's $160 a year if you become a member, but there's still lots of stuff that's available if you're not a member. So that would certainly serve my purposes better at this point.
You can use lots of groups that we incubate use NAO as their resource. Again, if you're thinking about setting up a nonprofit, we have essentially incubated the process of setting up the nonprofit so you can go raise money to pay the costs of setting up the nonprofit. But if you want to do that on your own, that's not a problem. We're really primarily, I would say if you have specific projects that you want to go over and you want to raise funds and don't want to set up a nonprofit, then we're the vehicle. But if you think a nonprofit is the better option, then that's great.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Well, I think this is a lot of great information for our commission and city staff to digest and think about. And we appreciate you coming to our work session today and providing us information. Christine, thank you for arranging this, and we appreciate it. We'll digest and discuss further as we will, unless there's any commissioner comments or questions that we would like to continue with before we move on.
Just to remark that we have had this on the agenda for these work sessions to figure out, and this is one avenue that we've talked about, and this seems like a nice avenue provider.
Yeah. And so I think that is, I know we do not have a work session in January due to the holiday, but this is something that we should continue our discussion in February. I know we do have an item on the February work session agenda, but this would be something in February that would be good to discuss, and that gives the commissioners who aren't able to make it today to digest some of that information. All right.
And I just want to add, and Cricket, I think, hit on some issues where I was going. There are other ways and other groups that do exactly this. The Greater Abandon Association, which I was the executive director of, that's exactly what we did. We had our 501c3, but we were a community development organization, and we believed that we needed to support other groups that wanted to achieve that nonprofit status. So we served as our physical sponsor and did exactly the kinds of things that you're talking about here. Question is, are there local groups that might want to serve in that physical sponsor role? I don't know, but that is an alternative, I think, to what we're looking at here.
And I've said this before, and my position on that is local groups are better in the because they understand the community, and there's less process to get to know people, and you're not dealing with somebody in Portland. And so if if there's an organization that already does this, and it's local to your community, that's probably a better option. But that doesn't mean that people can't call me up on the phone if there are questions about all these issues, because again, from our perspective, we are a nonprofit who provides this to people, and whether they're a program or not, we still do the same work. So even if you go with a local organization, happy to still be a resource.
Thank you. We'll move on down to item 5 or 4 or 3, or looking at the numbers. The staffing commissioner closing comments. Patrick, any closing comments for today?
Thank you, Christina, for making this happen. I think this will help us a lot, and I think I've seen a lot of questions related to this. How do we do this? We should do this. We need to do this. So this is great. Thank you.
Carl?
No real comments. Just, I think, like everybody else, getting ready for the holidays.
Yeah, for sure.
Comments just on this particular issue. I mean, I'm not against involving CPF in some things, but before I get in the camp of saying that's a way that we should go, I want to feel a little bit more comfortable with it. I want to have a discussion among ourselves about how raising small donations, whether it's credit cards or whatever, how that works good. I'd really like to see what one of these MOUs look like. I'm still concerned about the interaction between the city and this, because if funds raised become CPF's money. It's not that organization's money anymore. It's not the city's money. It's not the Parks Commission's money. I'm concerned about what impact it may have on the Adopt a Park program. So I think there's a lot of issues that we probably want to talk about. And I'm not saying not do CPF, but I think there's a lot of issues we want to talk about before I'm really comfortable to make a decision one way or the other. Something that was mentioned to me earlier during this meeting, Bill Davis retired, and I hadn't realized that. And like I had said earlier, sometimes I'm brain dead. Maybe I just didn't pick up on it. But I appreciate the service that he provided to the Parks Commission and the city, and I'm sorry to see him go, but I look forward to whoever the planning committee is going to appoint to the Parks Commission and work with them. And then the final thing is, again, not something to discuss now. We've already run out of time, and I know we don't have a work session in January, and I know in February we wanted to talk about Adopt the Parks program, and probably some stuff with CPF as well. But although I didn't attend, I watched the video, and it was the council work session on Toppers Park, and the clearing of the brush and stuff away to have a fire defensible area. And we need to talk about that at some time, and I will tell you just a couple of quick comments. One that struck me is that it's kind of on us. The city councilor Matthews had said that, well, he really wasn't aware of it, and it was kind of corrected a little bit later. And we were aware of it. Lots of times we knew that we got a $75,000 grant to go ahead and do that. What I mean by being on us is we just said, oh, great, we got a $75,000 grant. And we really didn't talk about what was going to be involved in doing that. And the public probably really didn't have the opportunity to comment on it either. And it's a difficult situation to be in, because our job isn't to micromanage city staff and tell them what to do. But at the same token, we're in this area where, well, we got $75,000 and what's our involvement? I will tell you the message that I got from the city council was that they wanted that in front of the Parks Commission. So it'll be interesting to see how that all goes. So just another thing for us to talk about and visit about sometime in the future. So that's it.
Thank you, Kirk. Jamie?
Just to say that Commissioner Matthews and I walked Front Street for in the interest of the Front Street blueprint that needs to be decided on going to 100% build-out design. In January, council meetings. And if you want to know what we did, we can talk about it afterwards.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie. Greg?
Yeah, thank you. No, I thought it was a great presentation by CPF. I think you folks asked some great questions. And I think for the December 20th, well, the next Parks Commission meeting, I'm not sure what day it is, the next meeting, we can definitely add the defensible space topic. If you guys would like to talk about that, we can definitely talk about that then. And then we can be getting ready for Christmas, and hopefully everybody's on their journey to that path and having a great time getting their houses festive. But again, I just really want to thank everybody for the great conversation today. I think it was very educational. It was for me, and I took a lot of good notes. And so just thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great night tonight.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate everybody for coming in here tonight. It was a great conversation, a lot of good information. We'll discuss defensible space. We have a few times, and so we'll be clear in the discussion, maybe visuals. But I know that we've discussed it, and I think part of it is it's a continuation of a project before most of this board was seated. So we went a bit more in depth when we had gotten the previous grant, and so I think that was because we were continuing it again. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I thank city staff for everything that you do, and also a reminder that Bus Jam is on Saturday, so please swing by Coos Bay North Bend Bi-Mart, bring non-perishable food and a toy. We would absolutely love that. So thank you so much. We appreciate everyone for being here, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
I think it'd be a great idea for the